What is your guess?
No, Chris.
I don't know.
Let's see who's hanging out. Mhm. Yeah, how's your Tuesday been?
Well, somebody's out there talking. So this starts at 6.
At 6, yeah. Yes, they're talking, but the webinar hasn't started yet.
So you guys are streaming this out, what, on Facebook as well?
Facebook and YouTube.
Okay.
Big time now.
Okay. All right. I know Eric Almeida was talking with, I think Eric Xavier. I don't know if it was last night or earlier today about trying to do something more with it too. You know, trying to stream it right out from our site. Yeah. Just so that when people,
Highpointnc.gov.
yeah.
Yeah, certainly you could embed the YouTube
Yeah.
video or the Facebook video.
Mm-hmm.
I think YouTube's probably better. Facebook might want you to log in or something.
Right. Yeah, YouTube's easier.
Yeah, that seems doable. And I know there's also question and desire for figuring out when there's multiple presentations,
Mm-hmm. Yep.
what the best way to handle that is.
Yep. You'll probably be invited to that. We're going to meet Thursday at 1 o'clock.
This
Yes.
Thursday?
Thursday.
Cool.
Thursday at 1.
Didn't miss it for the world.
Yeah, to try to figure out what we can do there.
I thought it was hysterical. So our whole department talked not our whole department, the communications part of it.
Right.
We talked for, I don't know, almost an hour and, debating different possibilities. And then at the end, Ryan was like, we should probably talk to IT. Like, they might have additional ideas. And I was like, oh my gosh, Ryan, like, you could have led with that, man. I was like, this is an hour of my life. I'm never going to do that.
That's right.
Anyway.
Absolutely.
But now I know to say that.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's so much that can be done.
Okay, Ryan says, get ready to switch in 2 minutes. You will hear them talk and then switch the screen. Okay. So yeah, that will be my SOP, as Sharon likes to say.
Right.
I had to ask him what that meant yesterday.
Hey guys, it's Megan from Legal. I just wanted to let you know that everyone can hear the conversation.
But we're not streaming, are we?
There's a few participants on already.
So let's see. It's right down here.
That's why I wish we were just in the same.
Mr. Moore,
Yes.
Mr. Morgan,
Yes.
Ms. Swift,
Yes.
Mr. Venable,
Yes.
Mr. Walsh,
Yes.
Mr. Wheatley.
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, you have 9 votes in favor of the motion.
Very good. By a vote of 9-0, the minutes of November 10, 2020 have been approved as presented. Before we begin our public hearing this evening, on behalf of the commission, I would like to welcome everyone, both here with us and joining us remotely. The commission is charged with reviewing and making recommendations to the city council on a variety of development applications, as well as on plans and policies for the city. Our review includes conducting a public hearing to obtain additional information and comments that could be important when evaluating an item. Due to the COVID-19 pandemic and the resulting state restrictions on public gatherings, the commission is meeting remotely in accordance with North Carolina state law. This has necessitated some changes to our normal meeting procedure, and I'll take just a minute to explain those. There are 9 commission members present at City Hall this evening. Items on the agenda will be heard as normal, with a member of city staff presenting a summary of the application, followed by the staff's recommendation. The applicant and those assisting the applicant, and all who are attending this meeting remotely, will then be given an opportunity to present information in support of the item. Planning and development staff published and sent notices that solicited the public to provide comments on these items by email, phone, or letter. The period for public comment on these items will extend for 24 hours beyond the conclusion of tonight's public hearings. For that reason, the commission will not be voting on any hearing item on tonight's agenda. Instead, tonight's meeting will be recessed to Thursday, December 10th at 6 p.m. This will allow the commissioners to further discuss any additional information or comments that have been submitted by the public before making an official recommendation to the city council. We'll start this evening with the first item of tonight's agenda, BRC Spirit LLC, BRC Spirit 2 LLC, zoning map amendment 20-20. Mr. Shannon.
Mr. Chairman, Herb Shannon, Senior Planner with the City of High Point Planning and Development Department. And our first agenda item for this evening is zoning map amendment case 20-20. This is a request to rezone a 3.6 acre tract of land from the residential single family 3 or R3 district to a conditional use office institutional or CUOI district. Or that's the current zoning, and the applicant's proposing to rezone it to a conditional zoning general business district. The current slide that is before you, that's just a larger overview location map of the site. The site is located along East Chester Drive, approximately 0.2 miles north of the I-74 interchange. And this is a blow up of the site. Just for those members of the public who are following, this is East Chester Drive. This is I-74, in the area that's shaded in that teal color is the site in question regarding this evening. That site is located at that northwest corner of East Chester Drive and Hilton Court. And there are two parcels associated with this request. One has a single-family dwelling on it. The other has an existing fitness center. This is an aerial photo of the site. Surrounding uses to the north is R3 zoning, single-family dwelling. To the south, there's an undeveloped parcel and a single-family dwelling. And to the east and west are undeveloped parcel and a single-family dwelling. All the surrounding parcels have a R3 zoning designation, and this is a blow-up of the zoning map of this area. The applicant desires to develop a convenience store with fuel cells at this location and a major eating establishment. The ordinance defines a major eating establishment as a facility with a drive-through window. The current R3 and CUOI district zonings do not permit this use. Therefore, the applicant has requested rezoning to the conditional zoning GB district. They've included with their application a conditional zoning ordinance in which they've offered conditions regarding access to allow a right-in only access to the site from East Chester Drive. They've offered a condition to provide a 100-foot wide buffer to the rear of the site adjacent to residential use that would be planted or supplemented to meet the type A planting yard standards. And they've also offered a condition to restrict allowable uses. Within their conditional zoning ordinance, they've noted that allowable uses would consist of a convenience store with fuel cells, major eating establishment, a hotel or motel, major personal service uses, microbreweries, micro distilleries, micro wineries, and a major retail sales use. And that includes retail establishments with up to 50,000 square feet of gross floor area. Staff has provided the commission and made available to the public the staff report. Would just note for the record on page 2 of the report of the various land use policies as it relates to the site. The land use plan, this is a copy of the land use map, designates this portion of this quarter for office use. And for the public, those areas that are highlighted in blue are designated by the land use map for office use. Those areas highlighted in yellow are designated by the land use plan as low density residential, which allows residential development up to 5 units per acre. I would also note that on page 2 of the staff report, there are various goals and objectives pertaining to the community vision growth statement, the land use plan, and the East Chester Drive quarter plan. And the site is within the East Chester overlay district and is within the City Lake, partially within the City Lake general watershed and within Ocala Lake watersheds tier 2 and 3. And we've included in your package a copy of the watershed map. So as we're discussing those items, you have an idea of what we're referring to. The area that's somewhat highlighted in this light purple shading, that's part of the City Lake general watershed area. The areas that are highlighted in green are part of the watershed critical area. Right next to Ocala Lake is considered tier 1. That lighter shade next to that is considered tier 2. And this other, the lightest green shade is considered tier 3. And as you can see, the site is in part of that City Lake general watershed area and with those tier areas of the Ocala Lake general watershed area. Just for background purposes, for our zoning histories, since the 1980s, this segment of the East Chester Gateway corridor has had multiple zoning requests for various office uses. There have been approximately 17 requests near the subject site for conditional use office districts between 1988 and 2000. I would note about 0.7 miles north of the site, there was a zoning to a conditional zoning GB district that was approved in 2018. The council's approval was specifically to allow the reuse of an existing 79,000 square feet, 2-story office building. And the only allowable uses were 1, OI district uses, and 2, an internal self-storage facility. And there were also conditions that the exterior of the structure not be changed so it keeps the appearance of an office use. We've also included information from the Transportation Department that regards their review of the applicant's traffic impact analysis, and the Transportation Department provided comments on what they recommend for the site: no access to East Chester Drive, access to be taken from Hilton Court, The Transportation Department also recommends construction of a right turn lane at that intersection of East Chester Drive and Hilton Court, and right-of-way dedication to accommodate that turn lane. Key points that staff would like to touch on regarding the staff analysis: East Chester Drive is an important and major thoroughfare within the city, moving traffic entering the city from the north and from the I-74. It's also a major gateway to High Point from I-40 and the Piedmont Triad International Airport. This segment of East Chester Drive near the I-74 interchange carries approximately 40,000 trips per day. In 2020, the NCDOT began construction of road improvements to alleviate congestion along East Chester Drive and at the exit ramps. And these improvements extend along the corridor to front along the zoning site. Land development along East Chester Drive corridor has primarily been shaped by the East Chester Corridor Plan. Through a series of adopted corridor plans and overlay districts, it established policies and standards. And some of those goals and objectives are to minimize traffic congestion caused by haphazard commercial development, prevent strip development, which in turn will degrade the corridor's primary purpose as a travel corridor, limit commercial uses to well-separated clusters at major intersections, implement deceleration lane policies to conserve the capacity of East Chester Drive, require driveways for corner lots to be from that side street, and retain the office land use designation because of concerns of commercial uses will hinder the efficiency of the corridor. To manage traffic and protect the qualities of the corridor, there were 3 specific commercial nodes that were established along the corridor. The first is at the intersection of North Main Street, extending along Main Street northward to Centennial Street. At the midpoint of the corridor, which is that Ski Club, Windover, Penny Road intersections, and at the northern part of the corridor at the Regency, Gallimore, Dairy Road intersections. Over the years, there have been expansions of commercials along those nodes where there were appropriate intersections that could manage traffic at those expansion areas. I think it's also important to note that the I-74 interchange was never planned as a commercial node. Due to the recent improvements that NCDOT has been completing in that area, the city conducted in a study of that area to review the impacts and evaluate what those improvements that NCDOT are in the process of doing, how that impacts that area. And that is the recently completed East Chester Drive I-74 land use assessment. And it studied the transportation project's impacts on adjacent lands along East Chester Drive from Festival Park southward to Lassiter Drive. And that assessment documented that the land area in the area along I-74 interchange is narrow and doesn't offer a lot of area for development. The assessment also noted that direct vehicle access from East Chester Drive has been restricted from NCDOT from the I-74 interchange, and just to point that out on the map here, northward to the newly signalized intersection of Hilton Court and Gordon Road. So basically, from this area northward, NCDOT has access restrictions, so there's no direct vehicle access from East Chester Drive to those adjacent lands. The assessment also notes that land in this area is constrained by Oak Hollow Lake to the west, which is part of the city's potable water supply, the topography and a classified stream, and by established neighborhoods to the east. You have included in your staff report a topography map. This is a topography map for this area. If you're not familiar reading topography maps, where the lines are further apart, that means it's fairly level. Where it's closer together, you have steeper terrains. You can see as lands get closer to the lake, the topography steepens. That's one of the reasons why that area is narrow. You don't have a large area for large development. And across the street, there is a classified stream on the opposite side of East Chester Drive. And as you can see by the closest of the topography lines, you have extremely steep terrain in that area. And the areas don't really flatten out. You have a small area that flattens out here. So that's part of how area is constrained by the topography and the classified stream. The assessment report also notes that the area is impacted by restrictions of the Oak Hollow Lake watershed critical area, as a significant portion of the land to the west of this segment, East Chester Drive, is within tier 1, 2, and 3 of the critical area. And once again, This is that watershed map, and it shows those critical areas of tiers 1, 2, and 3 of the Ocala Lake along the west side of this portion of the corridor. Based on the applicant's submittal, the Planning and Development Department offers the following comments. As far as compatibility with the surrounding area, approval of the requested CZGB district would enable commercial development of the zoning site inconsistent with the character of the surrounding area, both the existing and planned for this segment of the corridor. No other properties in the surrounding area can develop similarly at the potential level and intensity. Commercial development on the zoning site could negatively affect the potential of the surrounding properties to develop with land uses that are supported by the corridor plan and which recently affirmed by the I-74 Eastchester assessment. As far as mitigation of impacts, that is something that staff always studies as part of any conditional zoning request. Mitigating adverse impacts on adjacent nearby lands. The Transportation Department recommends prohibiting access to Eastchester Drive and the installation of a turn lane at that signalized intersection. The applicant's proposed district does not offer these conditions. Standards of the development ordinance dealing with screening and lighting will assist in mitigating any negative visual impacts as far as spillover lightage or the screening of outdoor trash areas. And the condition offered by the applicant to have that 100-foot buffer toward the rear of the site will push commercial activities away from abutting residential uses to the rear. Staff also looked at mitigations or adverse impacts for environmental features in the area. As previously noted, most of the site is within the Ocala Lake watershed critical area. And while a small portion of the site is within the City Lake general watershed area, development of the site is required to meet the applicable watershed standards. As noted in the I-74 Eastchester land use assessment, the site could be graded in such a way that drains more of the site toward the general watershed area, but any development of the site will still be required to meet all applicable watershed standards. Regarding mitigating any adverse impact on public services, high-intensity commercial uses are not supported in this area due to continual policy concerns about protection of the city's water supply. And to maintain a safe and efficient transportation functionality of the corridor, the Transportation Department has recommended no access be permitted to Eastchester Drive, which is not a condition of this proposal. Staff also looked at far as mitigating adverse impacts and use and enjoyment to the value of adjacent lands. As outlined in the I-74 Eastchester Drive assessment, the surrounding area is more significantly constrained with stringent watershed restrictions, topography restrictions, controlled access restrictions, and the classified stream that makes it infeasible for commercial developments in the surrounding area. The requested CZGB district would not be consistent with the surrounding character of this segment of the corridor. Finally, we always look at a zoning request, supportive changes in the area and preferred development pattern. There have been no changes in the type or nature of development in this area, no changes in policies or the corridor plan or as outlined in the recent assessment, no policy changes for this specific area to support commercial uses. The land use impacts from the I-74 Eastchester Drive interchange improvements were recently studied, and that land use assessment reported that the transportation improvements do not warrant a change in land use policies or zoning for the site. The establishment and development pattern along this segment of the corridor primarily consists of OI district and residential district, and a land use plan and that assessment supports or reaffirms that policy of office, institutional, and residential for this portion of the corridor. Therefore, staffers recommend denial of the applicant's request. The requested CZGB district conflicts with the Eastchester corridor plan and the recent assessment, which speaks to it does not recognize the physical constraints of the immediate area. There is a need to protect water quality and the objective to maintain the safe, efficient flow of traffic of this corridor. In conclusion, staff would note that requests as far as consistency of adopted policy guidance, the requested CZGB district would allow for commercial development and access to Eastchester Drive at a location not supported by the goals and objective in the policies of the corridor plan. The request as far as reasonableness and public interest, The request would allow commercial development inconsistent with the character of development, both existing and planned for this segment of Eastchester Drive, and could impact potential development of surrounding properties. As always, with any conditional zoning request, the commission must include a statement of consistency in their recommendation. And this may be accomplished by adopting the statement in the staff report or the commission adopting its own statement. I know there's a lot of information in the staff report, and are there any questions of staff at this time?
Any questions for Mr. Shannon? Chairman Kirkman, I do have one question. Given that any fuel cells, gas station, service station, whatever you want to call them, in the watershed, ultimately all those impervious surfaces, whether in this case you're 750 feet from the lake or whether you're 3.6 miles from the lake, anything spilled in those parking lots does end up either in Ocala Lake or Old City Lake.
Yes.
So from the city standpoint, would it be fair to say that this request, this development is either no more and no less a threat to the watershed than any of the other similar type service stations in either watershed?
I would note, as we've stated in the staff report, surface drainage it could be directed in such a way that it does not go directly into the critical area. But the policy has been, as we evaluate this area, not to support those uses in this area due to the close proximity to the watershed critical area, as it is directly behind the lake, Ocala Lake, and in that watershed critical area.
Okay, thank you. Chair recognizes Mr. Zuzak.
Is there another location where there is a gas station that is in the drainage area for Ocala Lake?
I believe there may be a few older stations that were developed prior to adoption of watershed plan. The only one I can think of off the top of my head is at the intersection of Eastchester and Centennial. But that was an older facility that was developed prior to the adoption of those watershed standards.
Thank you.
Chair recognizes Mr. Walsh.
And Herb, for the what Tom, Mr. Kirkman was asking about the water coming off of the parking lots, I would imagine they're going to have to put that storm into a pond.
Well, they're going to have to meet all appropriate watershed standards. Depending on the impervious coverage, they may require some type of on-site stormwater management facility based upon how intense they wish to develop the site.
To catch it before it went into the lake.
It catches it and holds it, but that is a function of the watershed standards that if you have a certain amount of impervious coverage, you're going to have to do an engineered stormwater control device.
Anything else for Mr. Shannon? Chair recognizes Mr. Wheatley.
I have a question, just kind of an oddball thing. If this was already zoned CZGB, what would they have to do to that site to put that gas station there? If they were allowed to, under the current zoning, if that was zoned for a gas station, what would they have to do to that? Or is that just meeting the watershed, like you just said?
Well, they meet the appropriate standards of the zoning district. They have to meet appropriate watershed requirements. They will have to meet whatever, depending on if it was conditional use or not, but that is so hypothetical. It's hard to address all those issues.
If I can, this is Lee Burnett. I'd like to answer that a little more directly. The watershed is established based upon the topography and the grade. So what drains into City Lake is in City Lake watershed. What drains into Ocala is in Ocala watershed. What makes this site and basically one other property a little bit different is that this property, while the majority of it right now is in the Ocala Lake watershed critical area, which those regulations just by itself prohibit gas stations or anything that has fuel tanks. But it can be graded such that it tilts into City Lake watershed. So therefore, these are the only two properties that we identified in the land use assessment that basically could be done this way. And so they can be graded such that they drain into the Cedar Lake watershed. If that's possible to be done that way, then they're not subject to the Ocala watershed standards. They're subject to the Cedar Lake general watershed standards, which would allow gas stations subject to the zoning. So to answer your question, yes, if this was already zoned commercial, if they could grade that site such that it drains into Cedar Lake general watershed area, then it is subject to those standards, and that does not prohibit gas stations. Now, I will add that this is the only property when we were looking at the land use assessment and in this segment of the corridor where that could be done. So one point I want to stress to you that's in the staff report is that the study identified this property as one of the few properties that could be developed from a commercial standpoint. Everything else, because of the topography, because of the constraints that Herb mentioned with the streams, with the watershed critical area, things of that nature, in the limits on impervious surface, it's almost impossible to develop anything of any kind of a commercial nature. So what's going to happen if this property is rezoned commercial? It's going to be out of character with everything else that's around it, because everything else around it at best could be some kind of office use or something along that would be allowed in the office district, such as an institution, such as small scale office, such as some kind of small scale residential use, that type of thing. And so that's why the staff is concerned with this, is because this property will be out of character with this segment of the corridor.
Thank you. Chair recognizes Mr. Juzak.
Mr. Shannon, do I understand you to say that a gas station is not a permitted use in a CUOI area?
Correct. That is not a permitted use in that zoning district.
Okay, so as I was reading this, I thought a lot of it had to do with the restaurant and the drive-through, but in fact, it has to do with a gas station as well.
Both of those uses are not permitted within the OI district.
Okay, thank you.
Chair recognizes Mr. Moore.
Mr. Shannon, just point of clarification, drive-through restaurant or restaurant in general?
Drive-through restaurant. The ordinance has two categories: major eating establishment, that would be a restaurant with a drive-through window; minor eating establishment, that is a sit-down restaurant without a drive-through window. The minor eating establishment is a permitted use in the OI district.
Chair recognizes Mr. Wheatley.
Just one more thing on the watershed. They just have to get past the dam with their watershed to get out of the Ocala watershed to get into the, they grade it so it goes past the dam. Is that correct?
It's graded so that it goes into the City Lake watershed general area. And let me just show that map.
Everything from the dam on is City Lake. I think that's what you're saying.
Well, here's the map again. This area in the purple is the City Lake. And I believe what you're stressing is correct, that once you kind of get past that area, but the main thing I just want to focus on is not necessarily the dam, it's based upon the topography, which way the land drains. Let Mr. Permit expand on that.
Yeah, the topography is a little bit different than what's shown on the map here. If you look at the topography, there's a little more of the site that's probably in the Cedar Lake general watershed area. But basically, it has to get to the street. Once it gets to the street, it's in the Cedar Lake general watershed for the most part.
Got you.
Anything else for Mr. Shannon or members of the city staff? Very well. Thank you, Mr. Shannon. Is the applicant present this evening?
Yes.
Would you like to?
Yes. Can you start videos? Or do you start the video?
Yes. You mean the video or your slide presentation?
Well, you have my slide presentation. If we're speaking, are you going to have the video showing who we are?
Not a video of you, no. The video is going to show your slide presentation only.
All right, well then let me start. Good evening, members of the commission. You know what I look like anyway. I'm Tom Terrell. I'm an attorney in the Greensboro office of the law firm Fox Rothschild, but my address is 529 West Parkway in High Point. Along with Judy Stalder, we represent BRC Spirit and BRC Spirit 2 in their application for rezoning of these properties to conditional zoning general business. I think that the one thing more than anything that is underlying the staff's recommendation to you is a 2020 analysis of land use in this part of East Chester Drive. This new analysis essentially is based upon, and it repeats to you, the same principles that previous planners put forth to the Planning and Zoning Commission in the 1980s. But what I'd like to do is to address only that study. Judy Stalder will represent and present the project, but I'd like to show you and illustrate why the concerns from the mid-1980s do not apply in 2020, and they cannot serve as a basis for land use analysis. Please go to that first slide, if you would. When we did this, now, originally, the land use plan was adopted in 1986, but it really was being studied, and all of the committee discussion was taking place in 1985 based upon the concerns that existed at that time. I think we all know that it was reviewed again in the early 90s. That was right at the time that the Water Supply Watershed Protection Act rules were coming into play. But it was essentially the same land use plan as it was in the mid-1980s. Now, why are these dates significant? Let's go to the next slide. This slide is a little bit facetious, but I want to illustrate that the whole world that we live in has changed in numerous ways. Internet, cell phone, all of this is a world that we no longer recognize. But let's go to the next slide here to see really what is relevant. Mr. Shannon was saying a few minutes ago that there have been no policy changes, no transportation changes, no land use changes. I really beg to differ. The whole world has changed since then. 1985 was before North Carolina and High Point adopted watershed regulations. That is a huge, major policy and legal shift. It was before traffic impact studies were required for new developments. That's a huge legal and policy change. It was before the East Chester corridor overlay was adopted. A huge legal and policy change. The I-74 bypass, I don't even think we had the first bulldozer out there until sometime in the mid-1990s. But that bypass is now, not only is it fully constructed, it's now being reconstructed. That is a huge change in the way we look at land in this part of East Chester Drive. The offices to the north on East Chester Drive, hardly a single one of them had been constructed in 1985 when the first East Chester corridor plan was being done. Now those offices have pretty much been built. The inventory of land is much more limited, and there's certainly not much developable land here at this interchange. Go to the next slide. Now, this is an issue because the land use plan analysis that you have just received and that serves as a basis for staff's recommendation, if you look at it carefully, it's really done in a 1985 context that does no longer exist. It uses 1985 laws that no longer exist. It uses 1985 development standards and development patterns that no longer exist. Let's go to the next slide. Now, let's look first at protecting the water supply. Actually, Mr. Burnett was very correct. I had nothing to say in argument with how he described how the land lies and what the rules and laws are affecting water supply watersheds. But it's important to know that we now have laws. When the first land use plan was done, when these concerns were developed, there was no Water Supply Watershed Act. In 1993, I was very much a part of the city of High Point and on the committees where High Point adopted the minimum standards. All of those protections, not just in High Point, but all over the state of North Carolina, they are codified, they're objective, they're mandatory. But the bottom line here is those protections are never decided by local boards. It is not a matter that's put before you as a planning and zoning commission. These are things that are done at technical review committees. You meet them or you don't meet them. And if you don't meet them, you can't do what you propose to do. Let's go to the next slide. Look at traffic mitigation. I know that this traffic impact, the transportation part of the land use analysis says that they're really concerned about traffic. Well, we don't have a subjective review of traffic anymore. Back in 1985, when the original land use plan was done, which seems to have been repeated to you just this last couple of weeks, traffic was a big issue. And we would fight out. It was the biggest part of arm wrestling that we did anytime there was a rezoning. And at the city's initiative, we moved to an objective standard in 1989, where if you meet certain triggers, the developer had to pay for a traffic study. The development community didn't like it at the time. The development community has got on board. But it requires a study from a neutral third-party firm. And there is a neutral third-party firm. They're an outstanding firm, Davenport Engineering, and the developer has had to pay for this study. Now, once again, transportation mitigation is an objective decision. It's not for board-level approval. If that TIA says a developer has to do it, that developer has to do it. It is a requirement. It also means that the city cannot require you to do more if the traffic study says this is all you have to do. Let's go to the next slide. For those of you who have not read one of these traffic impact analyses or who are new to land use and planning, let me give you an introduction here to what's behind the traffic study for this site. They use world-class, state-of-the-art, modern software that's used by the leading transportation engineering firms all over the world. It is Synchro and Sim Traffic Modeling version 10. They use the two Bibles for trip generation, the Institute of Transportation Engineers, 10th edition, and the Transportation Research Board Highway Capacity Manual. They also use DOT policy, it's not law, but it's policy on street and driveway access. They used the DOT planning branch traffic forecast. They did study parameters as were required of them by the city and by the state. They went out and they studied the site. And if you read the study, they used the most conservative assumptions possible. All right, let's go to the next slide. Because of what we just looked at, when we look at that transportation impact analysis, we are required to accept it. When they say there's adequate capacity, you don't listen to what the neighbors say. You don't listen to what people who just don't like any traffic say. You have to look at the neutral third-party professional. And they say there's adequate capacity for the project. We have to accept this study when it says no improvements are triggered at I-74 or at the intersection at Cypress and Gordon. When this traffic study says a right-in entrance will alleviate queuing and delay at East Chester and Cypress, we have to accept that. We can't just summarily reject it. It is based upon all the data on that previous slide. And when they say the level of service, which could be A, B, C, D, E, or F, when they say it's almost identical with a project built as it is today, we have to accept that. And they have an objective, modern way of proving their points. Go to the next slide. Or do I need to say please? The land use study talks about aesthetics of the Gateway Corridor. Once again, aesthetics of the Gateway Corridor is not an issue before the Planning and Zoning Commission. We've codified what we want those aesthetic standards to be. We codified them back in 1992. They were controversial when they were adopted. In 1994, we made them much stricter, and they include architectural changes related to the massing of buildings, the materials that you can use, the lighting, screening, landscaping. You cannot put something in this location that looks like a convenience store could look on South Main Street. The standards don't allow it. This would not be a standard highway or general business look. So when you meet the standards that our city has adopted for the protection of the corridor by law, you have built something that protects the visual appearance of the gateway. Let's go to the next slide. Now, this was an interesting one in that analysis about protecting neighborhoods from incompatible development. So I want to actually focus on that just for a second to ask, is there a neighborhood here? Are the alleged neighborhoods something to protect, and is it incompatible? Let's go to the first slide behind this. Cypress Court is a very nice development. I have driven down into Cypress Court. I don't think anybody could say it is not a nice neighborhood. But the fact is, you cannot see this site from Cypress Court, and you cannot see Cypress Court from this site. Now, somebody who lives in Cypress Court could say, well, we see it when we drive out to Eastchester, but that's actually a statement that would apply to anybody in High Point. It would apply to every single person on the Planning and Zoning Commission who drives down Eastchester, because you would see this development too. Let's go to the next slide. Now, there are two houses between Cypress Court and this proposed development. Here they are. The one on the left is actually a commercial place. It has a business for a hair salon. And the one on the right, they're both rental properties, and they were built some time ago, but they don't constitute what you would call a neighborhood. They are two houses that are left over from a time when people actually had and built single family homes back on what now has become one of the major corridors of our city. Go to the next slide. This is from an aerial. This is what Hilton Court looks like. Hilton Court has three houses on it and an abandoned trailer. Now let's go to the next slide. Let's see what's down Hilton Court. These are the first two houses that you see on the left. There are 5 or 6 cars in the driveway of the house on the right. Let's go to the next slide. And here is the one house that's on the right, and I think it's an abandoned trailer in one of the lots that is on the left as you go down Hilton Court. I'm not counting, by the way, the house at the entrance, because it will be removed to be part of this development. Let's go to the next slide. There are two houses. You've heard from both of them in a lot of emails. I would argue that this is not a neighborhood either, but it's two houses that where people live down on the lake. I believe they've been there for some time. But those houses are right behind a substantial amount of development that's already in place. Let's go to the next slide. So another part of this study that you've received talks about how there's sometimes it's okay for, quote, local convenience retail. When I saw that, it was pretty clear. This is a planner term, but it's a term that does not have any currency or meaning among people who develop or sell real estate. I think, in fact, I challenge you to name one retail establishment in High Point or anywhere that can exist solely on the business generated from the neighborhoods around it. In fact, it's just the opposite. The smaller your store, the broader the area from which your customers have to come if you indeed want to survive. Let's go to the next slide. So to conclude, you have to ask yourself if all the space on all the land to the north, for the most part, has already been developed as office, and we're not still trying to protect that. We now have a new interchange that's not just been built, it's being rebuilt. What is the highest and best use for this land? All of us, I think, will agree there's not going to be a single person who would put a single family home on this site. And if you develop multifamily, it's really too small for multifamily. It's not an appropriate place that anybody who develops in that space would be trying to develop. Office demand is about as weak in High Point as it is anywhere. This is not a secret. We all know that office demand has been weak. We thought that we would build out Eastchester Drive decades ago. It never really happened. If we had been Raleigh or Charlotte, Eastchester Drive would have been fully developed by office by 1990. We're High Point. That demand for office, it's nice to say office should be used right here, but the office demand is getting weaker. I think all of us know that more than half of the people who have learned that they can now work from home kind of like that. So there's going to be a much weaker demand. So what is the highest and best use? The highest and best use is a small tract retail that can carry the cost of grading the site so it drains away from Oak Hollow. And that's the highest, and it's the best, and it's the most logical use. So having made that presentation, I'd like to introduce Judy Stalder. I think everybody on the Planning and Zoning Commission knows her. Judy will present the project.
Thank you.
This is Judy Stalder, 3735 Admiral Drive here in High Point. Thank you, Mr. Terrell, for those points about the land use plan. But regardless, this request is structured carefully to fit into the area. And for uses, that means we are asking to rezone from an office district that allows restaurants to an office district that allows restaurants to have a drive-through. And we're also asking for a convenience store with gas pumps. Now, restaurants without a drive-through are already permitted. And typically the reason that drive-throughs are not allowed is to encourage pedestrian traffic. This site is in an auto-oriented area with few, if any, pedestrians, and especially not now. And transportation studies have shown that traffic does not increase on the adjacent streets for drive-through restaurants just because it has a drive-through. Just a few months ago, most restaurants had to close, and the ones that could reopen either had a drive-through or they cobbled together some sort of drive-through. Now, business is not going to go back like it was in January 2020. And this is one thing that needs to be considered in land use plans going forward. Now, a convenience store with gas pumps is a logical, typical, and expected use at the intersection of an interstate and a major state highway. The need for the use is there. The infrastructure is there to handle the traffic. Often developments come to you for rezoning and must add conditions that cost hundreds of thousands of dollars for transportation improvements to be made just to support the use they want to put there. In this case, millions of dollars of improvements are already being made to alleviate congestion and allow for future development. And it's logical to take advantage of the built infrastructure. It's just like it's logical to expect a convenience store with gas pumps in this area. The request is structured carefully to the specifics of the site. We're combining two smaller lots, and there will not be a zoning domino effect because this site is unique in the area, as Mr. Burnett explained. Developable portions of this site can drain into the general watershed area and not a critical watershed area, unlike other nearby properties. And the sites that haven't developed in this area just haven't, mainly because of topographical issues. We've structured this to protect the adjacent neighbors. We're proposing to use only the frontage of the property, and the developer will retain the 100-foot wide undisturbed buffer adjacent to the Hilton Court neighbors. With that buffer in place, this site is not visible from homes at 1821 East Chester, and it certainly is not visible from the condos on the interstate. Protection of the water supply is a regulatory decision, not a political or land use decision. If this site is rezoned and the project with the convenience store with gas pumps doesn't meet the requirements, then it can't be built. Zoning's just the first step. There are plenty of properties zoned for gas pumps that do not meet all the regulations, but we want to take that first step and investigate to see if a logical use can be placed on this property. If it is built, it has to meet the regulations of the development ordinance. It has to meet the regulations of the North Carolina Department of Environmental Quality, and it has to meet the regulations of the Environmental Protection Act. All of those things have to be regulate water development in a watershed. So you don't have to make that decision to protect the water supply. That's done by regulation. Recommending this zoning is not recommending gas pumps in a watershed or even allowing gas pumps in a watershed, but it allows the property owner to explore the possibilities for their property. This request will maintain safe and efficient transportation on the corridor. The TIA states that the current improvements under construction will accommodate current and future traffic. After seeing the TIA, staff asked for further study of the requested right-in access. And I think that was mainly because the guiding East Chester overlay document, which was adopted a quarter of a century ago, suggests limiting access. But further study by the independent transportation engineer confirms that East Chester Drive and Cypress Court intersection will operate more efficiently if a right-in access from East Chester Drive is provided to the site. This is just more proof that outdated plans do not reflect recent changes in market demand and how we live 25 years later. Mr. Shannon, could you show the elevation of the proposed site? This is an elevation of what this site could look like in this area. And it's not because we are doing anything extra, it's because the East Chester overlay or gateway overlay requires buildings in this area to look like this. So this isn't something we have to condition into the rezoning. So just to have a quick review, this plan is structured to fit on this site. And we're doing that by limiting the uses, by protecting the adjacent neighbors, by maintaining an efficient transportation corridor, and the aesthetics and water supply are protected by regulation. I'd like to conclude by saying there's an overabundance of office zoning in High Point. In fact, the development ordinance rewrite added more commercial uses just to encourage development of all the office zone property. And as staff said, there have been no office zoning requests in this area in 20 years. The last requests were before 2000. Even with those additions to those commercial additions to the office zoning, you're still seeing the market come to you with requests to upgrade office zonings to allow more commercial. You get limited business plus a little bit more commercial, or office plus a little bit more commercial. And since that rewrite, a pandemic has shown us that most of the office work we do can easily be managed from a home office, and indicating that even less office space is needed. I want to thank you for listening to us tonight. We have members of our team available to answer questions.
Thank you. Do any of the commissioners have questions for the applicants' representatives? Chair recognizes Mr. Juzak.
I have a question. We've talked about the fact that this is a big interchange area and useful to have a gas station there. I'm looking at the various things you've presented. It's not clear to me how anybody on I-74 is going to get to this gas station.
Right now, the improvements that are being done are to improve the way that traffic moves on and off that interstate.
So once they get onto Eastchester, how are they going to get into this gas station?
There's a controlled signal at Cypress Court and Eastchester Drive. I think it's labeled as Hilton Court on the map.
So they're going to come in off of Hilton Court?
It's a lighted intersection. If you've been out there, the light used to be at Gordon Road and Eastchester Drive, and now it's the Gordon Road intersection was reworked so that it's further away from the interchange so it can handle the traffic better. So that there is a signal intersection at the corner of Cypress Court and Eastchester Drive where this site is located.
So the only way into this place will not be off of Eastchester, but will also be the back way. Is that correct?
It's not a back way, it's just an intersection.
And those cars will be going up Hilton Court?
But not into the residential area.
Yeah, for a few feet.
Hilton Court, that's all I said.
Yeah. Well, the transportation department wants all of them to go up Hilton Court. We're also offering a ride in from Eastchester for the traffic coming from the north.
I'm Greg Minimal with the Transportation Department. So we did review the TIA, and they are correct that there will be no improvements needed at the intersection of Hilton Court and NC 68 Eastchester Drive. However, we had them kind of assess if they did not put the right-in only in that they're proposing to assess how the impact, what the impact would be to the intersection without that right-in only. And there will be delay if that right-in only is not in place. However, I emailed back the traffic engineer and said if a right turn lane is provided at the intersection, would that mitigate the impact of the delay on the through right that will be there in the future? And she said yes. If a right turn lane is put in at Hilton Court, then that would take care of the delay caused by not having the right in only directly into the site. So that's why we are proposing not to have that direct access into the site. If you look at their proposal, it's a small turn lane. They don't really have enough even to get a full turn lane in there. So you're going to have some issues with cars trying to get into that site from 68. If they're able to put that full turn lane in at the intersection, that provides you more storage for cars making that right in onto Hilton Court.
Is it true that however you get in here, you'll have to come out on Hilton Court?
Correct. Everything coming into the site will have to come out on Hilton Court. So if you're going north on NC 68, currently the way they have it proposed, you'll have to make a left at Cypress and then onto Hilton to get in. If you're coming south, they're proposing that right in only to come in from the south if you're coming south. But you can also, if they put that right turn lane in at the intersection, they can go onto Hilton Court as well, to Cypress Hilton as well.
Thank you.
I have another traffic question.
Chairman recognizes Mr. Wheatley.
So Hilton Court, is that a developed road? Because I know it kind of fades into gravel at some point.
It is pavement. I'm not sure to what standard it is. It does,
Okay.
it is probably substandard currently.
Yeah.
And that portion of Hilton Court, Cypress Court and Hilton Court to that point has been improved as part of the improvements on 68 and the interchange.
I would like to add just one other thing. We did have discussions with NCDOT as well. They are not in favor with the amount of development they're showing on the site currently. They are not in favor of a right-in only off of Eastchester either.
And thank you, that information has not been communicated to the developer.
Yeah, I have an email from NCDOT stating that.
Could you, you two get together on that and maybe present it when we get back together Thursday, just so we'll have a definitive?
Sure, I have the email here, so.
Okay.
Yep.
All right, thank you. The chair recognizes Mr. Walsh.
Mr. Venable?
Yes, sir.
That turning lane out there, how much storage? Does it have any storage?
Just by the looks of it, there doesn't seem to be any storage. I'd have to do, we'd have to do a more detailed look. I mean,
Yeah,
they
'cause it's
just,
not
this is
long.
not really a detailed plan. They just submitted this for
Yeah.
for
it's not
purposes,
long
but
enough.
it looks more like a taper. I don't know how long it
Right.
is. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks, bud.
The chair recognizes Commissioner Swift.
So in that same question, you may not have an answer for this. So if they did do the turning lane down at the stoplight, how long would that be? I mean, would it come from where that one's, so it would have a lot more?
Yeah, that would have to be if they get approval, once they submit their plans to the technical review committee, we'll take a look at that. They'll have to submit a driveway permit to NCDOT as well. They'll take a look at it and then they'll determine how much storage they need and how long a taper they need.
Mr. Morgan, you recognized by the chair.
While you're here, can you go over your conditions that you put, kind of go over the specifics that you had in the conditions,
Right.
and just kind of highlight those again?
Right. Our conditions are, we don't really have conditions per se. The applicant put the conditions in for the right-in only.
All right.
We would prefer no access to Eastchester.
Your recommendations.
Recommendations, no access to Eastchester, and a turn lane at the intersection to handle the traffic that will be going into the development.
Before Mr. Venable gets away again, the commissioners, chair recognizes Mr. Venable, Commissioner Venable.
Yes, and my understanding is from the report earlier that DOT and CDOT would not allow any development between I-74 and that intersection. Is that correct?
That's correct. There'll be controlled access.
Anything else? Very well, thank you. Before the commissioners deliberate, did you have another?
Yeah, but I had a non-traffic.
For the traffic?
No, non-traffic for the respondents or
For the applicant.
petition applicant, yes.
Chair recognizes Mr. Zach.
You talk about the fact that the protection of the water supply is a regulatory decision. And I understand that whatever is done there is going to have to comply with applicable regulations from the federal government, the state government, and everybody else. And that will be wonderful. But looking at the history of underground storage tanks, which is not very long since they were first regulated in the late 1980s, they get amended from time to time. And the primary reason they get amended is because society gets more experience with what's happening. Contents of fuels change. And what was a good standard for a leak-proof gas tank previously turns out to be maybe not in the future so good. And unfortunately, typically, society discovers these things through major accidents. So my question is, are we saying that because we're going to comply with standards today, we don't have to worry about the water quality of Oak Hollow Lake?
Let me start addressing that, and we actually have an expert here with us on that subject. The state of North Carolina adopted the regulations in 1989. They were part and parcel coming out of the Clean Water Act from the early 70s. And the people involved in that, they were chemists, they were biologists, they were civil engineers, they were environmental engineers. The experts who had their hands in that were many. And then it was put out for comment and review by the public. So what we have are some very strict regulations. I don't think anybody has ever said that North Carolina has weak regulations or a weak regulatory environment for protecting the water. So that leaves us with, do you meet the regulations that our state has says are adequate, or you don't? And part of that is where are the tanks located? And we have decided that you cannot put a tank in a watershed critical area, but you can put a tank in a general watershed. I will also say that the tanks of the mid-1980s aren't the same tanks that we have today. A lot of the tanks that were leaking in the 1980s were tanks that were put in place as in the 20s, 30s, 40s, back when nobody had these concerns. But let me introduce Doug Canavello. He is with Pyramid Engineering. He is here today. Everybody in the engineering department in the city of High Point knows Doug. So Doug, would you be willing to address that issue?
Yeah, I'll do my best. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hello? Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, so I'm Doug Canavello, and I'm a professional geologist and owner of a engineering and consulting firm, and have done a lot of work around underground storage tanks really for most of my mature career. But a lot of it, I started in the 90s, and a lot of what was happening in the 90s is what people are sort of left with as far as what underground storage tanks, the situations that they leave and the leaks and that sort of a thing. And a lot of those things happened, as Tom pointed out, back in the early days of the 80s and into the 90s. And in 1998, there was a major change in the way that underground tanks were allowed to be constructed and how safe they were. And so a lot of tanks came out of the ground and a lot of leaks were found. And, really, I've made my whole career out of cleaning up the old leaks from the 1980s and the 1990s. But if I had to survive on the leaks that have happened since 1998 and forward, there's precious little. And the reason is that they've done a ton of engineering and science into how to keep these things safe. Probably the main thing that I can point out as being probably, and the easiest thing to think about for anybody, is something called secondary containment. So that the tanks are essentially a tank within a tank. And all the lines are the same thing. It's all this sort of solid contained system where if anything does leak out of one of the tanks, all it does is it goes into the second tank. And as soon as it goes into that second tank, it's going to be monitored and discovered, because we have all this great electronic gadgetry these days that has sensors that are beaming the information on a 24-hour basis, so that the discovery of a release is very fast. But even if there is one, it's being contained in a secondary containment. So yeah, if I had to leave you with one thing, and that's probably the biggest thing that's ever happened in terms of the safeness of these tanks, is that situation. And even the DEQ, I mean, I'm looking at their chart right now. I wish I could show it to you, but you can have within 500 feet, you can have a double-walled tank within 500 feet of a public water supply well, which is a much bigger drain. If you were trying to suck in water from something, a public water supply well is a pretty major thing. Just a couple other points. All the plants that would be involved in putting this thing together and developing it are sealed by a professional engineer. There's inspections during the installation. There's an inspection with somebody from DOQ at the end of installation. There are required inspections constantly with these tanks. Actually, the operators of the tanks have to train people, their own employees, to be knowledgeable about the tanks, and they have to do inspections themselves. And record keeping is, of course, electronic at this point. So it's just, if I had to leave you with anything, it's the secondary containment, but it's a different world in terms of underground storage tanks these days, in terms of safety.
And yet I see that the federal government made major regulatory changes in 2015.
That's correct.
Based on all the problems that they'd encountered in the years after the original regulations were established.
Well, I think there's always room for improvement, and there are changes, as ethanol became a more popular fuel, there's certain things that occurred with that, but they try to keep ahead of the curve, I would say that much.
Any of the other commissioners have any further questions for the applicant? Very well, thank you, sir. Before we move to deliberation by the commissioners, I wanted to note that we received public comments from 8 persons, and they had asked city staff to make sure that their comments had been received. So I just want to mention their names, so if they're with us tonight, they'll know that their comments were received and have been provided to each of the commissioners. Alyssa Cameron, Vesta Kennedy, Stacy Jolly, Leanne Patterson, Van Locke, Beverly Bard, Rob Jolly, and Cheryl Lawson. And I assume all the commissioners got the emails and the package which the recording secretary provided this evening. With that, I'll ask for deliberation from the commissioners. We don't need a motion and we won't take a vote until Thursday, but if there's anything that the commissioners would like to discuss, now would be the time to do it.
Chairman, I just want to mention Ray Wheatley here, that we did get a video from Stacy Jolly as well that we all had access to when I watched.
Well, I'm going to throw a couple of things. This is Chairman Kirkman. A couple of things out there, and I'm going to play devil's advocate a little bit. As far as the watershed protections, as the applicant pointed out, these are regulations that are set at the federal and state level. And the best that a developer can do is adhere to the regulations before them at the time they're developing the property. It's really beyond the scope of a commission that deals with zoning and land use. I noticed that one of the arguments the applicants made was that restaurants are already allowed in this area. And they're asking simply for a restaurant with the addition of a drive-through for various reasons, but also a convenience store, gas pumps, and a car wash. So it's not just a small addition here. It's almost, as I made the comment to somebody earlier, it's like going to a dog show and you bring a bear and say, well, it's a canine, so it's still technically a dog. It's sort of a different thing, obviously, than what the land use plan calls for, and I think that's where city staff has an issue with it. Conversely, this piece of property is not suitable for a lot else under the land use plan other than office or commercial, and as the applicant pointed out, there doesn't seem to be a lack of office space in the city. There's not a lot of requests for it. There's not a lot of demand for it. So the property is not, I would assume right now under the current land use, it's not exactly a hot commodity. These are just some of my thoughts. If anybody else wants to expand on those or shoot them down or add something different. The chair recognizes Mr. Uzak.
I understand what you're saying. It makes sense. I think one of the questions we have to ask ourselves is, why does anything have to go there? I mean, what does High Point desperately need another fast food restaurant?
Well,
do we need another gas station?
That's a risk the developer or the business owner takes. I mean, I don't think it's really up to us to pick winners and losers.
Yes, but if they're coming to the city and saying, we need rezoning in order for this to happen, the city can say, I mean, we can't say, but the commissioners, the city councilman can say, no, we don't think that's really all that important. We can't say that. I understand that. And as I was thinking about that when we were talking about the TIA, we all have doubts about the TIAs. The numbers that come out of those things, and they say the number of trips that are generated,
We all roll our eyes, but I accept that you have to take them because that's the way it comes out. And I'm not going to get carried away about that, but I drive through this area regularly and I'm like, okay, I'm having a hard time understanding how more cars can fit in here.
Okay, Chairman Kirkman, in response to Commissioner Zuzak, when you mentioned why does anything have to go there? Well, it doesn't. But as we've heard from applicants time and time again, property owners have a right to develop their property. Now, I'll counter that by saying they also have, if they're going to develop their property, they have to do it within the confines of the zoning and the land use plan. And the reason cities have zoning and land use is so that you don't have helter-skelter development. You're looking for something that's uniform and orderly and fits a pattern. So zoning sometimes prevents people from putting certain things on their property. That's just the fact of the matter if you're in the city limits and your land is zoned for a particular thing and not for something else. Chair recognizes Mr. Wheatley.
You know, I drive through there. I drive through the 74 bypass. I drive through a lot. There's not a lot of gas stations on 74. You know, for other people that are coming through to stop and get something to eat, fill up their gas and move on, and maybe stop and do some shopping, furniture shopping or something, you know, it's a little awkward to me that the only gas station close to that is further down Eastchester. I guess it's a little gas station on what's that?
Well, you have two. You have Kelly, and then you have the Circle K.
Yeah.
And then of course further, just a couple of miles up.
And then of course you go past there, and you got to get all the way up to Wendover.
No, if you stay on 311 74.
No, Eastchester.
Right.
You go past that on Eastchester.
Yeah, you would have to go up.
Way up on 70.
And I believe that is because of restrictions of the zoning and the land use plan.
And I'm wondering how these people feel here in these condo situation, because if I live there, that would be awfully nice to have a gas station. I'd come out in the morning, grab gas and go. I mean, did we hear any positive comments? I saw all the long negative emails. I didn't see any positive comments. Be curious. But
Chair recognizes Mr. Venable.
Well, one of my concerns are actually a big concern is that this is not just a single issue. It's not one factor that's questionable. There seem to be several issues with restaurants with a drive-through, with fuel tanks, with traffic. That it is a myriad of problems and concerns that have to be addressed before this would make sense. And to me, it's just this culmination of this kind of waterfall of so many different issues that are of a concern for this particular property.
Chair recognizes Mr. Walsh.
The one thing I look at is we do have 73, 74, and I was telling someone earlier, that comes all the way through or roundabout High Point, going from Greensboro, going out to 85, going to Winston. And if you look at each one of our exits, whether you go up to 5 Points, the Presbyterian homes up there, we have nothing. We go on back this way, we go to Eastchester, now we're going to bypass that. Then they can go down to Plank Road. And my only concern about it is I'm maybe thinking selfish, but sooner or later, we got to get these people off the highway and shop in High Point. And this piece of property, I understand the land use better than anybody. I've been on committees with land use. I think, though, our job here is just the zoning part. Everything else will fall into place as they go. Like Ms. Stoller said, we're the first line of defense, and then they have to go from there. And that's my only concern is I rode through this whole area, and nobody's stopping. Everybody's running 45 to 60 to 65, and they're going right by us, and they're heading right to Winston, or they're heading to Greensboro, they're heading to 85. When are we going to take some of our exits, like other towns and cities have done, to draw off? I did go, there's only like 1 or 2 gas stations, but I know what everybody's seeing here is I'm talking again like what Mr. Kirkman, we go from people's concerns, I think, is we're going from a restaurant to a car wash to a convenience store. And I also read in here, and I'm skipping here about crime, that is not an issue because it can be anywhere. I don't think we should say it's a 24/7 place and it causes crime. I just don't think that. But I think we have to really look at what's going to happen if the land sits empty. You know, you look at the other hand of the tax base for the city. Are we getting any business off of 73, 74? Are we just going to have a pretty 4-lane road that just, like other things, just go right around High Point? 85 still goes around High Point.
Well, and not to interrupt this, Chairman Kirkman, a lot of people do get off of that interchange though, even without a gas station. And that's the reason that they're having to make these improvements, is because just the tremendous amount of traffic. Anybody that's been through there, particularly during rush hour, morning or afternoons, traffic was backed up something terrible. I halfway feel that even once they get this done, because it's so hard to get ahead of the curve in traffic, it'll almost already be obsolete. So the idea that nobody's stopping and coming, now I don't know whether they're going home. I don't know if they're going shopping. I don't know if they're going, I don't know.
I think they're going down 68.
Okay, okay, and there are other places to shop. So, I mean, I see what you're saying, but if it's a matter of trying to pull people off the highway that wouldn't otherwise stop in High Point, there's plenty of them seem to be doing that. I'm just playing devil's advocate.
All right, that's so good. But when they pull off, they just get on 68, and then where's their destination, I guess?
Well, if it's not at this proposed restaurant or gas station, maybe it's at a restaurant up the street or a gas station up the street. I mean, they're going somewhere. And further up the street and back down, you have all these types of development already. Chair recognizes Mr. Morgan.
What was presented tonight was very succinct on both sides. One of the things that I'm looking at here is we do have an issue with our zoning classification in that particular area and the plans that we have that are 25 years old as far as the update is concerned. I mean, you got to look at the O&I in that particular area and those particular owners and their employees. They have to get in a car and leave. And I mean to go to lunch, anywhere. There is nothing, you can't walk on this street. So this is not pedestrian friendly area at all. The Overland, we can sit here and debate. I mean, I know being in High Point when everybody's driven by there, I mean, it's a blight, guys. I mean, it's been a blight. That corner has been a blight for years. So I don't have a problem with the tanks. I know enough about the tanks to be dangerous and to see that can be mitigated. I do have a problem with, and I do think it's a valid problem, of the transportation and the deceleration lane as presented and what's there. Knowing everything that was said here today about this is a major intersection and it's going to continue to be. Now, we can debate all day long about the fix, if you would call it, the transportation and the upgrades that have been going on out there. However, it's not streamlined. It's inefficient at best and will be. So whether it's this particular property, you're going to have to think outside the box. It doesn't fit. It certainly doesn't fit an office and institution, and it will lay there forever. So it's up to us to start that.
This is Chairman Kirkman, and I would add something to what you just said, and I believe the applicant pointed it out. It's very unlikely, let's say we did recommend approval. It's very unlikely you would have a domino effect simply because this is the only piece of property in that area where you could build this sort of thing. I'm not necessarily saying that in support or being against it. I'm just mentioning that. So if the question is a precedent, are we going to have other people coming in saying, okay, you did it for them, we want to do something similar next door? They couldn't do it. Chair recognizes Commissioner Swift.
So I agree with Commissioner Morgan on my concern is the traffic there getting off. I think if they had that turning lane long enough to where, because that's going to be a problem because every time you come through there. But then I'd also like to note that during the pandemic, and you just switching it so that they could have a drive-through, I think if it's approved, because if you have a restaurant, there's so many restaurants that have had to add drive-throughs to survive during this pandemic. So I think that part of it would be a good thing.
Are we going to assume the pandemic is forever, or hopefully there'll be an end in sight?
Well, we hope it will be, but there could be in the future. And I mean, I think just our way of life is, even if it's over, I think it's be a while before people maybe trust going in and sitting down, and they may still pick up food. I mean, there's a lot of people that have had to change that. So I think allowing that piece of it, in my opinion, would be.
Chair recognizes Commissioner Moore.
Yeah, I think it's great conversation, great comments. I echo, forgot who said it, but great presentation on both sides. It's interesting. So I also traveled this corridor, and I've been chewing on this in preparation for today's meeting for a while. It's interesting to me that, I can drive essentially from Wendover to 74, and there's nothing like it. And it's pretty consistent that Ocala Lake is behind it. I don't think that's by accident. I can appreciate the comments about this commission and what our remit is. There's a standard in place now, so we're talking about changing it, right? So for all intents and purposes, when we're considering changing it, I think we do have to consider these other things we're talking about. Otherwise, there's no need to change it, right? So I would agree. I think the traffic is challenging there at best. I do recognize the changes that are being made. I hope they improve it. I still think it's going to be a challenge as well. And finally, I agree. I don't think COVID is going to be here forever. So I'd encourage us not to make a decision based upon things like drive-through or not. Also don't want us to make the decision just on whether or not it'll be developed at some point. Whether it's office space, whether it's a restaurant, you could put a beautiful restaurant there that doesn't have a drive-through, and it would be perfectly fine and fit within the zoning that's currently there. And I'm not pro or against it either, because I'm generally very pro-development as my general disposition, but just things to consider as we come to a decision over the next 48 hours. So thanks for all the presentations and again, the comments.
Thank you. Chair recognizes Mr. Wheatley.
Yeah, my thing, with the traffic again, I think Mr. Venable alluded that they'll have to go through the steps to appease all the steps of the process, and they'll have to do whatever they say. So
right, we're not actually approving a particular plat or anything. We're simply either going to recommend for or against.
It's just a design sketch.
Anything else from the commissioners? If not, I'm going to close the public hearing on this item for now, and I'm going to ask the commission members to review any public comments that they will continue to possibly receive over the next 24 hours subsequent to tonight's meeting. We'll give further consideration, and we'll have a motion and a vote for recommendation at the when we reconvene on Thursday, December 10th at 6 p.m. Next item on tonight's agenda, City of High Point Zoning Map Amendment 20-23.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, Herb Shannon, Senior Planner at the City of High Point Planning Department. The next zoning case, Zoning Map Amendment 20-23, is a continuation of the city's comprehensive zoning map amendment project, where staff is evaluating zoning throughout the city and looking to eliminate obsolete zoning or zoning that may be a barrier to development. The area that is being considered is one of the last items under round 3. This is a multi-year project. There will be other rounds, but this is the last area under round 3. Staff yesterday evening submitted to council properties for consideration on the round 4 that you'll be seeing over the next year and a half. But in regards to this specific proposal, we're looking at lands near the intersection of Johnson Street and East Hartley Drive. The area that is shaded in teal color is the lands under consideration for evaluation under this portion of the zoning map amendment project. I'm just going to go to our next slide where we kind of identify the various developments. You have a approximately 3-acre tract of land off of James Road near Oakview Road. You have several multifamily developments, Chatham Woods, Foxcroft Townhomes, Windchase Townhomes, right near that intersection. To the south, you have an existing church and some city-owned property and a Northbridge Townhome development. In regards to the property to the north off of James Road at 608 and 610 James Road, that site currently has the larger tract has a abandoned structure that was formerly a daycare center and an undeveloped portion of the abutting commercial tract right there. This land was rezoned in 2000 to a conditional use residential multifamily 16 district to facilitate development of a townhome development. That project never came to fruition, and this site has been sitting unused since then. As far as that former daycare center has not been used since the rezoning that took place in 2000. As there have been ample time for this site to develop and nothing has occurred, staff is recommending that it rezone back to a former single-family zoning district. So staff is recommending rezoning from the conditional use residential multifamily 16 district to the R3 district. If a residential project is proposed in the future that warrants rezoning, then the city would consider as going through the process for a higher density. That site is owned by a church, and if the site is rezoned to the R3 district, that R3 district would allow a religious institutional use there without rezoning. So staff is recommending that site be rezoned to the R3 district. And if you look at the zoning map in that immediate area, those surrounding developments, except for that commercial use, is all R3. As far as the abutting multifamily developments, the Chatham Wood Apartments, Foxcroft Townhomes, Windchase Townhomes, and the Church to the South, those were all part of a larger 62-acre rezoning that took place in 1984. There were various conditions, mainly dealing with dedicating land for the future extension of East Hartley Drive, which has been completed. And there were some conditions about not extending this cul-de-sac street to the north or not extending James Court. All those conditions have been met. So staff is recommending the Chatham Wood Apartment Complex, Foxcroft Townhomes, and the Windchase Townhome be rezoned from conditional use residential multifamily 16 to residential multifamily 16, just removing those old obsolete conditions as those conditions for road improvements have been met. In that same area at this northwestern corner, you have 2 tracts there that are also zoned conditional use RM16. Those lands are owned by the city of High Point. They're associated with lands that as part of Oak Hollow Lake in that area. And it is in a watershed tier area, so there's a very limited development potential for that area. So, and you also have a similar situation at this other corner where you have the Journey Church and another undeveloped parcel to the south. Staff is recommending rezoning from the conditional use RM16 district to RM16 as those conditions regarding dedicating right-of-way for construction of East Hartley Drive have been met. And finally, to the west of that, you have the Northbridge Townhome development. That development attained its current zoning in 1998. And conditions have been met. And then for that development, mainly limiting access, and those access, you have one access point here. The other access comes off the public street Snyder, where part of it goes to the east and to the west to serve that townhome development. And when you look at all of these cases, the primary purpose of the rezoning is to remove the old conditional use zoning as those development conditions have been met. And staff is recommending rezoning of the Northbridge development from CURM16 to RM16. So just in conclusion, except for this area off of James Road where staff is recommending R3, all the other areas are proposed for RM16 district, and staff is recommending approval. The request is consistent with adopted policy guidance as the proposed zoning map amendments are generally supported by the moderate density and medium density residential land use designations for each of these areas as contained in the adopted land use plan. And the request is reasonable in the public interest as the amendments are needed to remove unneeded restrictions on the properties and to remove the conditional use district which cannot be amended. As always, when the commission does make their recommendation on Thursday, you do have to include a consistency statement, and we offer that statement that is part of the staff report. That is a brief summary. Are there any questions of staff?
Questions for Mr. Shannon? Oh, okay. The chair recognizes Commissioner Morgan.
On James Road, 6, 8, and 610,
Yes.
why are we recommending to downsize the zoning on that particular one versus?
That area was originally single-family zone.
Okay.
And the staff has recommended it go back to its previous zoning since nothing has happened as far as the proposed townhouse development that was supposed to go there. The land use plan does have that area designated for moderate density. So if there is a proposal in the future, they could certainly request rezoning. But staff has recommended that it goes back to its former residential zoning district, single-family zoning.
Anything else for Mr. Shannon? Very well, thank you, sir. I'll ask the secretary, I assume there were no public comments received on this agenda item? Okay. Do the commissioners have anything to discuss or deliberate? If not, I'll close the public hearing on this item for this evening. I will remind the commission members to keep an eye on their email box in the event that city staff does provide them with any further public comments. This public does have 24 hours subsequent to this meeting to send those comments to the Planning and Development Department. We'll give further consideration, make a motion and recommendation at the reconvened meeting on Thursday, December 10th, beginning at 6 p.m. Next item on tonight's agenda, City of High Point, determination of merit for a street name change.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, Herb Shannon, Senior Planner. This final item on the agenda is a street name determination, and just a little history for some of our newer members. Street name change is the one item that the Planning and Zoning Commission makes the final determination on, does not go to City Council. Anytime there is a proposal for street name, whether it's by an applicant or the city, this request is from the Planning and Development Department. Before we even schedule a public hearing, a determination of merit is brought to you just to make sure it's not a frivolous request, make sure that the application is meeting all appropriate street name policies. So before we just go to a public hearing, we bring up a determination of merit. The commission evaluates and says, is this a reasonable request? In this specific case, the Planning and Development Department has submitted an application to rename several streets due to the realignment that are in the process of being completed by NCDOT at the East Chester I-74 interchange project. This is how that area previously aligned, where you had Cypress Court, kind of came this configuration to a signalized intersection in Gordon Street right there. Cypress Court has been extended to this area. A cul-de-sac is placed here on Golden Road, and it's realigned in that area. So I just wanted to show you this, just to remember how it previously exists. And what staff is recommending for your consideration and determination of merit is setting a public hearing date to consider the following. As far as the area outlined in purple, this is a newly constructed street. So staff is proposing that that street name, the Cypress Court, be extended along the area highlighted in purple. At the intersection of Hilton Court and East Chester, where Hilton Court used to go straight through and as the primary movement, it now has been realigned. So we're recommending that initial 100 feet be changed to Cypress Court, and that realigned area here be Hilton Court. I'm sorry, yes, Hilton Court. Across the street, now that Gordon Road doesn't go all the way through and a cul-de-sac has been installed, and you have a roundabout to help with traffic management, we're recommending this former Gordon Road be changed to Gordon Court, and this newly constructed street here, outlined in blue, that be changed to Gordon Road. Now, the realigned streets are in the final stages of completion, and to ensure there's no confusion when the NCDOT finishes their work there, the Planning and Development Department has submitted this street name request to change and establish those street names. The Planning and Zoning Commission must first determine that the requested street name has merit. Staff has made a determination that meets the policies for consideration. If the commission finds that the request lacks merit, and you deny it, then the process ends there. If the commission determines that the request has merit, then you would set a date for a public hearing. Staff will notify by mail and do a legal ad. Notify by mail all those abutting property owners of the proposed street name change. And they receive those notifications, and a legal ad will be noted in a newspaper and for that. So staff is recommending that the commission proceed forward as setting a public hearing date. I believe your next meeting is on January 26th. Is that correct, Gina?
Yep.
January 26th for a public hearing for the consideration of the street name application.
Do we need a motion and a vote to determine merit?
Yes.
Would we do that tonight or on Thursday? Tonight. Very well. Unless somebody has a question for Mr. Shannon, I'm going to make a motion that the street name change proposal has merit and that we accept a public hearing date of
January 26th.
January 26th.
Second.
Commissioner Morgan has seconded the motion. I'll ask the recording secretary to take a roll call vote.
Commissioners, when I call your name, please respond yes or no in response to the motion that Mr. Kirkman made, that this proposal has merit and to set a public hearing date of January 26th at 6 p.m. Mr. Uzak.
Yes.
Mr. Kirkman.
Yes.
Ms. McGill.
Yes.
Mr. Moore.
Yes.
Mr. Morgan.
Yes.
Ms. Swift.
Yes.
Mr. Venable.
Yes.
Mr. Walsh.
Yes.
Mr. Wheatley.
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, you have 9 votes in favor of that motion.
Very well. By a vote of 9-0, this commission has determined that the street name change proposal indeed has merit, and will hold a public hearing on that item on January 26th. And now, Director's report.
Thank you, Chairman. Lee Burnett, Plan Development Director, just wanted to call attention to 2 projects that's coming to an end. We mentioned earlier tonight the East Chester I-74 land use assessment, also the Jamestown bypass assessment. Both those studies, Heidi Galante on staff presented the recommendations, preliminary recommendations to you a couple meetings ago. We've had one virtual public meeting on the East Chester one last month, and we've got another virtual meeting on the Jamestown one scheduled for December the 15th, which is next week. We'll finish up those based on the comments that we receive. We'll make any last minute adjustments or changes in the reports, and they should be before you at your next meeting in January. With a series of recommendations on changes in policy. You did see one thing tonight that we advanced earlier, which was the street name changes that were recommended from that study. There's also some street name changes that are recommended by the Jamestown bypass, but we've got time to work on those because that road is still under construction, or just beginning, I should say, to get under construction. Last thing I just want to do was just call attention to your meeting dates in January. So that was it.
Very good. Unless any commissioners have anything else to add, I will make a motion for a recess until Thursday evening, December 10th at 6 p.m.
Second.
Commissioner Walsh has seconded the motion. I'll ask the recording secretary to take a roll call vote.
Commissioners, please respond yes or no in response to the motion by Mr. Kirkman to recess the meeting to Thursday, December 10th at 6 p.m. Mr. Uzak.
Yes.
Mr. Kirkman.
Yes.
Ms. McGill.
Yes.
Mr. Moore.
Yes.
Mr. Morgan.
Yes.
Ms. Swift.
Yes.
Mr. Venable.
Yes.
Mr. Walsh.
Yes.
Mr. Wheatley.
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, you have 9 votes in favor of that motion.
Very well. By a vote of 9-0, we are recessed until Thursday evening, 6 o'clock p.m., December 10th in these chambers.